Nest. Today we're going to be making some sauerkraut. I'm going to show you how to can it. I'm going to start with a little bit of the equipment that you might need to be able to get involved in canning or getting involved in things like sauerkraut making. It doesn't require a lot of fancy equipment. Really want to demystify the idea of canning. People think it's really an involved process, and it can be if you're pressure canning, but we're not pressure canning today. We're just doing some water bath canning. I'll explain to you a little bit more about what that means. First, I have to gather some supplies. This is our food room. We have our freezers for food storage down here and our canning shelves. It's somewhat early in the season, so we've put some things up, but not a lot. We're really going to get into these big jars when we start doing peaches and pears and applesauce later on the season, and tomatoes, which are still coming. But in the meantime, I just need to pick up some jars. We're going to be doing pint-sized jars of sauerkraut and getting them up on the shelf so that we have them for New Year's Day when we want to make our pork and sauerkraut, which is a tradition in our family. So I'm going to need some jars and some of my supplies that I keep down here. Today we're going to need pickling salt, and I need the lids and rings for the jars, and I keep those over here. Wide mouth rings. You might notice that my jars that we keep on the canning shelves, I don't keep rings on them, and that's because they're just used to secure the lid down. This is the lid, that's the ring. And once they've sealed and they've sat for enough time, you can go ahead and take those rings off and reuse them. So you don't need to own a lot of rings, you just need to have enough for whatever batch you're doing that day. So we can take this upstairs to the kitchen and we can get started. And you can see that we're at the end of the season, so a lot of these cabbages are getting eaten up by bugs. They're tiny heads and they're really getting eaten up. So I'm going to get rid of all these exterior leaves that are full of holes, and I'm just going to use what's salvageable from the center of the cabbage to shred and make some sauerkraut. So all we need to do is, I'm going to take these completely out, shake off any soil. I planted these back in late March or early April, and I'm just going to cut these away with my saw. So the chickens will go in there and they'll eat what they want, they'll scratch, they'll turn it into, rototill it and turn it into compost for us. And next year we'll have it as fresh soil to go back on top of these beds. This is a good head of cabbage, and all the rest of this is just going to go into the compost bin. And all these little holy leaves can stay here. I'm just looking to get as much of that fresh cabbage in the center that I can shred as possible. No sense in carrying all this junk inside.
And why is it that the cabbage leaves have holes in them?
Well, the Japanese beetle attack this week, they just start coming out in July, and it's pretty late to be harvesting cabbage. I've been harvesting for the last several weeks, making coleslaw and all kinds of other yummy things. You can even see the eggs from other bugs being laid in here. These are probably cabbage moths. So between the cabbage moths and the Japanese beetles, I'm now losing this battle. And it's just time to end it. But there's a lot of really good cabbage in the middle of here, and the chickens and the bugs can have the rest. All right, back in the kitchen. Looks pretty clean inside. There's a couple outer leaves I think I'm going to go ahead and pull. All right, I like to slice by cutting these in half. Makes it a little easier on the mandolin. This is my mandolin. I don't even remember where I bought it. It's not a terribly expensive tool, but if you don't have one and you just want to use a knife, that works too. My grandma used to have one of these built into a wooden board. It was like a coffee table size thing, and it would run on that. But you don't have to do it that way either. You can use a knife, you can use a mandolin, you can use a food processor by cutting it into quarters and shoving it down there. This goes really quick though, so pay attention, look at your fingers while you're doing it. Make sure that you don't leave any finger in the sauerkraut. When I pull away, you can see how thin the slices are. My mandolin from falling off. And that's about perfect. That's what I want, is these nice pieces that are small. I don't want big chunks in my sauerkraut. I like just have thin slices. You could take these other pieces and you could chop them and make them into coleslaw or whatever. I just avoid this hardcore. Some people cut it out before they start shaving it down or chopping it. I just avoid it, just to save a step and not have to do one extra step. And that's kind of all there is to it. Fresh cabbage, we picked this 10 minutes ago. It's still warm because it's hot outside today. So you ready to make some sauerkraut?
Sure.
Okay, so I actually made some 2 weeks ago and it's been sitting and curing ever since. But today's batch that we just chopped up, I'm gonna show you how it's done. But to get a complete video in one day, I wanted to make sure that I show you, and then I'll show you what the finished product looks like. It can sit in its brine for 2 weeks to 4 weeks, depending upon how bitey you like it. Mine smells really good and it stopped bubbling, which means it stopped fermenting about a day or so ago. So it's ready to go ahead and make into sauerkraut. But this is essentially the process. Sauerkraut has 2 ingredients, cabbage and salt. I use pickling salt. You can buy this anywhere, the grocery store, Walmart, I don't know, Target, Amazon, wherever you want to go pick it up. I happen to live in an area where we have a lot of really good food stores in the Amish community, and I can pick it up there. So you're just going to take your salt, sprinkle it over top of your cabbage, and let it sit for a few minutes. It'll actually start to draw the juices out of the cabbage. And as you work it around, it'll draw more and more and more. Now, this is what you call a cut finder. If you have cuts in your hand, you're going to feel it. But we're going to massage this salt right down in the bowl into the cabbage. And you'll feel eventually that salt will disappear. Through the process several times now over a few minutes of squeezing it and scrunching it down so that we can soften it up and draw the liquid out. We've got a lot more liquid in the bottom. Should your cabbage not make enough liquid in the time that you need to can, that's about an hour process, then you can go ahead and make some brine. It's 4.5 teaspoons of pickling salt to 4 cups of water, and you can just put that on the stove and melt that dissolve that pickling salt down into the water, and you can pour it over top. And that's perfectly fine to use to cover the cabbage. The cabbage has to be covered with brine in order for it to work. Okay, so once we have our cabbage down inside and I have enough brine, because I've either created it or I've drawn it out from the cabbage itself, I'm going to put an inverted plate on top and push down. You want the cabbage to be submerged under the brine. So I'm going to push it down, and then you're going to need some sort of a weight on top to be able to hold that plate down. Something as simple as a coffee mug full of water, any kind of weight will do. Each day we're going to have to come back in here, pull this off, and turn and rotate this. I've skipped a day or two, so it's not the end of the world if you skip a day because you go away. But you want to keep that pushed down in and be checking on it and rotating it, stirring it once a day. These pieces floating on top, if they turn really brown or spoil, you can pull them out and put them in compost. But essentially you want to leave it like this with a towel on top in some sort of cool environment, not warm, not cold, but cool environment. I tend to use the floor in my kitchen near air conditioning. So I'm going to heat this up and I'm going to hot pack it. I don't have to pressure can it because it's water bath canning. That makes it a lot easier. So if you are intimidated with using a pressure canner, don't worry, because lots of things like sauerkraut, jams, jellies, fruit, they can all be canned using a water bath canner. You don't even need a special canner. You can use any pot that you have. I'm using this old pot. I don't even know where I got it. Maybe my brother handed it down to me. My jars are in here filled with water and they're sitting in a rack in the bottom. You definitely need to have your jars sitting up off the floor, off the bottom of the pot, because you don't want them sitting right on the bottom because the heat will be too strong. So there's a metal rack in here that they're sitting on. I'm going to heat this up so we can get our jars boiling and get them hot and ready to go. And we're going to heat up the sauerkraut at the same time. Don't boil it, just heat it up and bring it till it's almost boiling. That's what we call hot packing. You can cold pack if you prefer. I just like hot packed things. I think raw packing, meaning taking it cold and putting it into a hot jar, I just think it makes poor quality canning. So I like hot packing, but lots of people do it the other way, and that's fine too. So we have both of these going. I'm going to get the lid on top of these to make sure that they stay warm. And once we get them up to temperature, we're going to start the canning process. So we're starting to boil. I'm seeing a couple of bubbles. I have the canning rack down inside that keeps them stable. And right now I have 7 jars in here, which is kind of a typical canner load. I could be doing quart or pint-sized jars in here. Today we're just going to do pints because we don't need that much sauerkraut at once. And if we do, we'll open 2 jars. So we're waiting for these to come up the temperature. I have my sauerkraut up the temperature, so we can go ahead and pack this as soon as the jars are boiling and hot. In the meantime, I'm going to need to get a few supplies out. I've got my canning lids ready, and we picked up those rings downstairs in the basement, so we're giving them a rinse, and we're gonna go ahead and put those in a small pot. I like to use something shallow, like this, for my lids and rings, because when we can, we want them to be hot when they go on the jar. And I need my canning lifter. And I use this to pick up my rings and lids. And when they're inside of a deep pot of hot water, you're gonna burn your hands. So it's really nice to just be able to throw them in a low pot of hot water, and you can lift them out as you need them. So I'm gonna fill this up, load it up with some rings and lids, and I'm gonna get 7 ready for the batch. We just need to get these up to temperature and make sure that they're hot. It'll soften the seal that's on the inside, and you need to make sure the top of your jars are smooth. If there are any chips or cracks in them, they have to be gotten rid of. They're great flower vases, we don't throw them away, but we don't use them for canning any longer, because this will soften and make a seal to the top of that jar lid. So it's really, really important that you check your equipment ahead of time. The band itself, I keep these until they're completely rusty on the inside, and then we get rid of them. But I'm just gonna go ahead and put them together in here and get this on the stove so that they're good and hot when we're ready to start canning.
Gonna need ourselves a bigger stove soon.
We need a bigger stove soon. Hey, that's a really good point, Jonas. You don't need to have fancy equipment, and you don't need to have a fancy kitchen. We are currently working out of our apartment kitchen while we're doing renovations in the house, and because we're doing it ourselves, that means it's gonna take a little longer. So in the meantime, we're working in this kitchen, which is fine. There's all the equipment I need here. It's sizable, it works, but it's definitely not the full-size kitchen that we would be accustomed to, but we're making it work. So yes, I would like to have a bigger stove so I can put more pots on it at once. No one gets to eat while Mom's canning because the entire kitchen is taken over by canning, and everybody gets kicked out because there isn't any room. Hopefully when we have a bigger kitchen, I can can and you guys can still eat at the same time. So I'm gonna go ahead and put this aside since we have this already made. This will go into another batch for another day. And we're gonna go ahead and start the process of canning. It's really simple, y'all. You need a couple of tools that I haven't gotten out yet. And one of them is a funnel. You don't have to have a funnel, but it does make your life a lot easier. You'll need tongs and a ladle. I have a lot of new fancy ladles, and this 25-year-old one seems to be my go-to and my favorite, so I'm going to use that. You don't need this, but it does make your life easier to be able to get the lids out of the hot water. I'll pull the hot water over. And the one thing that I do think is worth investing in is a jar lifter, because lifting these jars out of this steaming, boiling water is difficult without one. This is a jar lifter.
Where can I find a jar lifter or a lid lifter?
Those are good questions, Jonas. I bought mine at one of those Amish supply stores that I go to in my area, but I know that you can get this at Walmart. You can buy them on Amazon. Anywhere that you can buy canning jars, you can generally buy canning equipment.
I think I'll find a link for that and put it in the description.
Put a link for that in the description. All right, so canning jars are down inside of here. I'm gonna put my jar lifter and get around the top of the jar, and when I lift it up, it is full of hot water. Slowly turn this upside down and let that water come out of there. A little bit of water isn't gonna hurt. Remember, there's water in the cabbage. And then I have too many towels, Jonas. Too many towels.
Want me to take one?
How about I just put this one over here and do one at a time? All right, so my canning funnel has not been sterilized, so I'm gonna drop it down in here for a minute. My ladle has not been sterilized, so I'm gonna drop it down in here for a minute. My jar has been sterilized. And now, I have a conundrum. I need my tongs. I'll pull this out of here. It's sterile now. So we can go ahead and start packing the jar. And we're just gonna take some sauerkraut, pop it down in there. You wanna get it pretty full. Don't pack it so tight that there isn't any air space to be able to put brine down in. But I'm gonna pack it to about there. It's not overly packed. There's enough room to get brine down in between. and fill it up. You can hear it work its way down in there, and you're just going to keep repeating this process until all of your jars are full. And then one step that is easy to forget important is to take a butter knife and run it down along the sides and allow the bubbles to work their way up. So we're not trapping air down inside the jar. You want that air out so you don't get any spoilage, and get that down inside of there. If when you do that, it creates more space, which it usually does, just add a little bit more brine right on top. Same process as before. We take our paper towel, we dip it in the hot water, we try not to burn our hands, and we wipe. Then my jar lifter, my lid lifter on top. These are hot, towels are good, and that's it. I'm going to take that jar and drop it right down in, grab another one, keep going. Well, 10 minutes have passed. We did 10 minutes of water bath canning for sauerkraut. So that just means that your jars have to be in a pot, boiling water, completely covered. And like I mentioned before, they're sitting on a rack so that they're not sitting on the bottom of the pot, because the bottom of the pot, that direct heat would be too strong and could crack the jars. So they're finished, and we can take them out and we can put them onto a towel to cool. And it's important that they sit untouched until they cool down naturally, and you'll hear the jars start to pop. So I'm just going to lay this out and put a pot holder here. Move my pot over just to make it a little easier to unload them. And they're finished. You'll hear the pops happen within anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. You can do this directly from the stove right to the counter, but we just have a counter full of things, so I'm moving it over here. Same process as before. That little bit of water that's laying on top, we just want to drain that off of there, but lift it firmly from the jar and just set them over here on the towel. The lids have a raised section in the middle, and they're still raised. And over the course of the next few minutes, as they start to cool down a little bit, they're going to pop, which means that they're sucking down. You can actually hear it cooling down. And as that cools down and pops, then you're actually safely ready to go ahead, and it can consider it sealed. It's canned at that point. But you want to let them cool completely. I often leave them until the next morning, until they're completely cooled. All of their lids have popped. And then you can take the rings off at that point. You don't need the ring to store them. And just label on the top your date, what's in it, unless you can obviously tell what's in it. And that's the entire process. I usually use this hot water to just wash dishes with, and I put my ring, or my, oh, I can't get it out of there. I put my canning rack, I take it out of the pot and set it aside. Everybody has a crazy drawer, that's ours. And that's the canning rack that I use in the bottom. Because this isn't a traditional canner, it didn't come with a rack, but I just purchased this. I bought this on Amazon, and I can set it at the bottom of my pot, and it gives you the distance that you need. I was able to get 6 jars around and 1 in the center. They were tight together, water was under, on the sides, and above, and that's all you need. 10 minutes boiling in the canner, and they're ready to go.